Well, many thanks for staying with us here on Global Mo. We have our first discussion of the day, and we're looking at the power grid. We're looking at the power grid collapse and then the government intervention in perspective. How far? And today we have in the studio with us Dr. AMINU HAYATU, who is a resident fellow, Center for Democratic Development Research and Training, CEDDRT, and he'll be helping us make better sense of this topic. Welcome. Many thanks for joining us on the program this morning.
Good morning. Thank you.
AMINU.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure to have you on the program.
Thank you.
But we've had, in the past couple of months, particularly this year, we've had many power grid collapse, many cases of power grid collapse. In fact, it was reported yesterday that there was another power grid collapse. Can you help us make better sense of this? Can we have an overview of the, power grid, power basically in Nigeria, and then the causes of this collapse?
Okay, thank you. Good morning once again, and good morning, viewers. I think the issue of power grid is historically an old one in Nigeria. Basically, children that are born in the last 30 years, 35 years, have come to see this problem as a national question. And the major issue is that the reason why Nigeria is not getting it right is because of the inconsistent policies that come along with the issue of national grid, especially power generation. And because otherwise the lessons that would have been learned in the past would have been used to correct mistakes and to actually draw up a very comprehensive national power plan that will be able to stay and sustain the economy and be able to serve the people of Nigeria. But because the policies that are driven by different regimes are not consistent with each other, they end up becoming it ended up becoming that there is no national framework with which any government that comes into power can work with. I will give an example. In the developed countries, there has been a well-planned and marked out national power plans, not only in terms of national power, but also in terms of other sectors of the economy. And in Nigeria, when regimes come, they come with their policies on national power, for example, and then when they go with it. So it's not the system that is being used to actually, carve out frames of national power, but it is this issue of, regime interest, where when the regime goes, all the policies, all the programs, all the decisions that have been taken about, the national grid would have just gone together with the government. And I think this inconsistency has actually, affected the way the experience of the Nigerian people is about national grid. We have seen a situation where the failure of the national grid, which has not started in this regime actually, has actually led to the devastation of the economy in its various aspects and ramifications. But that hasn't served as a lesson. And I'm saying that the policy on power of a country does not just start when the regime comes into play. It starts even with the appointment of the right people in the right places. We have seen where, appointments have been made, on various aspects that affect the national power that have actually not helped the framework for the putting in place, the national grid that will be able to serve the country. And the national grid is sourced from different geopolitical zones of this country. So the framework and the connection and the network between these national grids is not itself framed in such a way that there will be a comprehensive, program that is in place, that whoever comes will be able to actually, go by that policy and decision, and to be able to implement it. It's not that there is no funding in that area. It's not that there is no funding. There is adequate funding all the time. If you look at the allocations in the budget, it's actually given a fair share to be able to take care of the national grid. But because of that factor of inconsistency of the programs and policies and the decisions that are taken about national grid, all that has not been achieved. And the second factor is the question of corruption. Corruption plays a vital role, in that. We saw the drama that played out, with the former Minister of Power, during the immediate past administration. And we saw recently, the interviews he's granted, and the unfortunate instances that he has mentioned that he had wanted being fixed, but unfortunately because of some political interest and the factor of corruption, that has not been achieved. And this is where we are experiencing almost every 2 months, 3 months, the collapse of national grid. It has reduced, even the span has reduced to, weeks. After 3 weeks, after a month, then we experience this downturn of national grid, and which will never be able to work well unless this issue of the policy on national grid is being comprehensively outlined and framed in such a way that it will be about the system, not the people.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Aminu. But, this administration, we've seen programs that is supposed to help the power sector. Take, for instance, the NIPP and then the PSRP, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, sure.
National Integration Power Project.
Project, yes.
But we still have, these policies have been put in place to ensure that it helps stabilize the power sector. But we've still had consistent power shortages, grid collapses. How do we now begin to say that private sectors, or how can private sectors, other agencies, organizations partner with the government to ensure that we have firmer policies and even better the power sector?
Well, what we need to understand that the private sector is only an interested party on any national matter when it fits, when it aligns, with their own interest, and it aligns with their own objectives and programs. So the private sector only becomes interested when this infrastructure, this power infrastructure, is fully in place, well thought out, and all the infrastructure and the actors that are supposed to be in place and the programs are actually being well articulated. This is when the private sector's interest grows to take part in the envisioning of these programs. And that's why it is not just about the nominal mentioning of these different government programs on the power sector. It's not just about that. It's about the political will to really put the infrastructure in place. And when I say infrastructure, I don't only mean the buildings and the paperworks and the committees and the mention of all these things. It entails the political will in terms of the sincerity of the actors that are put to actually oversee these programs. Over time, the private sector makes a lot of assessment to see whether it can actually, commit its resources to go into partnership with the government. The rule of partnership is clear. We all have, the schematic framework of PPP, public-private partnership in Nigeria. And it works in some sectors. Well, in some sectors, it doesn't work. This is to tell you that there are some lapses and gray areas that are associated with the power sector, that the private sector is really looking at the issue with the third eye to be able to see whether that can work when there is this partnership. We have seen all this issue of discourse and what have you. The companies that actually have bought shares in this to partner with the government in order to make the national grid a better thing. But because the framework was not well articulated, we are still in the mess that we are today. We've seen when the ministerial screening started, the first set of screening that took place, there is one nominee who went to the National Assembly, and he was asked, because it was suspected that he was going to be given the power sector to run. And he has articulated, very clearly the issues associated with national power in Nigeria, and has proposed some solutions, which I think would have worked if that person is in power. But to tell you and to reiterate the fact that there is no inconsistency even in terms of the actors that are in play in the power sector, there is no transmission of these ideas, to those people who are supposed to be steering the affairs of the power sector in the country. And the president, in his goodwill, might appoint someone who is going to steer the activities of the national power. But it doesn't stop there, because he is going to work together with other actors. He's going to work with a lot of people under him. He's going to make a lot of collaborations and all of that. And because we need to see example in other countries that have succeeded in the area of power, we would have actually in details studies the modalities and modus operandi of these nations and see what actually worked for them and what went wrong. But because of that question of the political will and the question of corruption, these things are not working.
When we talk about corruption, while there are sides to people saying corruption, politics around power sector, we've had analysts come here and talk about technical challenges, infrastructural challenges that are contributing to the power sector. And you might want to say that it also stems from politics as well, the right people there. But can we look at these challenges and how it can be addressed, and also the impact? Because the collapses that we've had in recent times, businesses, it has really affected the economy of Nigeria and impacted, not in the right way, businesses. Can we look at the implications of this collapse and then the technicalities and the technical challenges?
No, someone is playing politics with the power sector. You cannot take away the fact that people are assigned responsibilities to do what they are supposed to do. At every stake in the power sector, if you check it, there is someone who has been assigned to do something. If those who have the responsibility to do what they are supposed to do haven't done it, what it means is that you are going to experience a glitch, and which is what we are seeing. And put everything together. You are not going to point accusing finger at any one single person and say the power sector is a system in itself. It's a system, and it's a complex one for that matter. So it's not just about how it's going to be fixed. We have all the technical knowledge and the technical know-how in this country. In fact, the experts and the knowledgeable persons in that sector are too much for the sector. They can be outsourced from outside the country and provide their expertise to other countries. So it's not a question, of shortage of manpower. It's not a question of the shortage of the technical know-how. It's not a question of the shortage of knowledge. It's not a question of the shortage of anything other than, to be able to, have an effective monitoring and evaluation mechanism in place that will be able to say that, okay, track on a daily basis. I'm not talking monthly or yearly or anything. put a strategic framework in place that will have a monitoring and evaluation that will be able to track every function within the national power framework, so that you could be able to see, for example, and analyze where is the problem coming from. Because if I tell you as it is now, you can hardly point and say this is where the problem is coming from, unless you do some very deep-rooted and rigorous analysis about the functions that are supposed to be provided by the actors in that sector. And that's why I say it's a system. When we say it's a system, we are not talking about individuals. We're talking about putting a strategic framework that will be able to function independently of any external factor. But of course, if you look at over the years, what has been happening is that there are both external and internal factors affecting that business of national power grid in Nigeria. And unless you look at it squarely, you cannot be able to fix the problem. But to get it right is to put a strategic framework in place, because the essence of the strategic framework is to be able to show the monitor and evaluator whose function is to do what and at what time and how. That will avail them with the information as to what might even go wrong before the collapse happens. And interventions will be provided, and checks and balances will be provided to prevent the constant reoccurrence of this collapse of national grid.
Okay, so we've had this, like you said, it's incessant. And then you've talked about, putting policies in place and the right people, right framework particularly. But what are the potential consequences of this power grid collapse, in the long run, if left unaddressed, if we don't have the right framework, the right people, policy, and we don't put checks and balances in place? What would happen if we have consistent power grid collapse, particularly for Nigeria's economy?
The implication is for a country that over-relies on power generation, from electricity. Definitely you are having a country, gradually shutting down in terms of business, both governmental and non-governmental. And that also, has implication on even the country's attraction to foreign investments in the country. And once you lose, a great percentage of the interest of foreign investment in your country, what it means is that you are not going to be among, you are growing to become, poorer, in the committee of nations in the global system. So it is very important that, measures are taken which will actually provide incentive for foreign direct investments and other kinds of investment in the country, and even promote, local production, because local production is really growing, disinterested in making investment within the country itself. So you see exports are being affected. And on the other hand, once there is a country that will rely, on the importation of finished goods and services, means that it is the level of its dependability on other countries enslaves it to those countries in the international system, and which is not good, which will spells doom for any country that wants to grow, in this age of globalization. But it's important also to equally understand that, this disadvantage of the national grid collapse has pushed over time, the ideas, of the solar generation of power, by different businesses and organizations, which provides, tend to push, the need to think about alternative means of getting that. And that contributes to the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, which Nigeria is a member to. So probably you could say that, no matter how you look at it from the negative angle, there is a positive side to it, which is, pushing individuals and businesses and experts, to think of the way that alternative sources of power could be attained, and even the government itself, most importantly, because the government has seen it that it is not likely to be able to sustain generation from this activity because of the huge burden and cost that even is associated with that. But that is supposed to be just an alternative to the consumer of the power, to say that I want to use national grid generated from electricity, or I want to use the alternative of solar, depending on what their calculations are in terms of their worthiness to go for any of these services. So it's important that the navigation takes place while the national grid is permanently fixed for the benefit of the people of this country.
Okay, it's good you mentioned about how Nigerians are becoming innovative and thinking outside the box to, foster alternative measures. I was just going to ask you about renewable energy in Nigeria's power mix, and then how you think that the government can incentivize this alternative, this sector, for investment for this sector.
Well, incentive has already started, if I can jokingly say this, because the national grid's consistent downturn is number one incentive to think outside the box. But in all honesty, this alternative for for sourcing other means for even wind energy, apart from even the solar, the wind energy is also being pursued by knowledge experts in terms of how it can be generated, especially in areas that have vast open space for wind generation. But the most important thing is not just for a country to experience problem and everybody will be left alone on their own, to devise means of alternative means of generating energy. No, the country has to have a national framework, a strategic framework to be put in place in order to guide its economy and its people on the way that these alternative sources of energy could be acquired in the best way, in the cheapest way that it could be generated. For example, the business of government, people have elected governments in place and have mandated the government, to direct their affairs. One of which is this, is to be able to put, and that's why in an interview I once granted, I have recommended that the government should in fact establish a special ministry, that will conduct the affairs of alternative sources of energy rather than, from the national electricity, the national grid, that is generating electricity for the nation. Because this ministry will focus solely on alternative sources of energy. And it will help because what is happening now, we have seen the CNG, initiative, and we have seen different kinds of initiatives that have been, pursued, especially most recently. But the coordinated way to do that is what is lacking in our country, Nigeria, and which must be provided. Unless it is provided, we may not be able to also get it right, as we have not gotten it right in the national grid. So care should be taken in the way that everybody, every participant is just left on their own to devise their own means, of generating this alternative means, because in the end, it might tell on the nation depending on, the kind of activities that are taking place. When you travel around the country today, all you see along the road, if you are going by road, is tons of charcoal, that people actually go into the forests, burn trees, and to get charcoal. They have been left alone on their own device to get alternative means of energy, and which is not good for the nation, because you are deforesting the nation. You are exposing the nation to environmental hazards. Even the smoke that these trees are burnt with is also affecting, the air pollution. And then felling of trees, the implication that you are exposing the health, you are exposing people to health risks and so on. So it is very important. That's why I said everything that has to be done has to be coordinated. And the business of a ministry is to coordinate the affairs for which the issues it is established. And this is very important. So, and it is only this way that, people can be guided, the government will be well informed, and the information will flow, effectively, and people are going to actually, be educated and, be guided on the best way that they seek alternative means energy.
Well, many thanks, Dr. Aminu, for helping us make better sense of this. I'm just going to ask you one last question. Although even though you had at some point made references to these things, but say international organizations, international cooperation, and investment, how can that also help the government? While the government has a major role to play, help us in achieving stable power or helping.
No, those, international organizations have only the business, the implication of their activities mostly is limited by the rules, the laws and policies of a nation. For example, a country might be signatory to one or the other international organization, but it is participation and membership in that international organization will only help it when it makes best use of the knowledge that is generated on that platform. And, it will be guided, and the activities, for example, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, by Nigeria being member of the United Nations, it participates in the United Nations Security Council meetings, it participates in the business committees and activities of the international system, which will help it, to be, a party to the resolutions that affects nation states for which it's a member. And that's why most of these issues have actually been very much dealt with, in international fora like this. But the thing is, how does the country makes best use of its participation in order to implement these things? They may appear, the international organizations, some of whom actually are inclined to, making sure that membership of countries, benefits them in terms of following the rules and the decisions taken. They have a limited function, by the activities of the laws of the country. So Nigeria can only benefit from that if it actually aligns very well with most of the resolutions that are taken on the different international fora, and domesticate it, of course, within a context of the country, and make best use of it without necessarily swallowing all that has been, taken hook, line, and sinker. We have seen many policies and programs and decisions that have been taken at the international fora that might not necessarily, in all senses benefit the nation. But, some aspects of it can be utilized in order to develop this. And the national power system stands to benefit from this, because Nigeria is a member of the World Trade Organization, Nigeria is a member of the African Development Bank, Nigeria is a member of the West African Union, and all these regional and sub-regional organizations, international organizations. So there are a lot of very important, useful resolutions. And one of the most important one is the peer review mechanism that actually happens periodically, in these international platforms. The peer review mechanism is a mechanism that enables a country to actually assess itself to see its level of compliance, by being a member of these international organizations and the decisions that have been taken. This will enable it to see areas of where it needs to improve, to see areas where it needs to make changes, and to see areas where it needs to actually, leverage on some existing international opportunities in order to develop the power sector and power generation in Nigeria.
All right. Thank you once again for helping us, lending me your perspective of government intervention as regards power grid collapse in Nigeria. Well, if you've just joined us, we have been speaking with Dr. AMINU HAYATU, Resident Fellow, Center for Democratic Development Research and Training. Well, we'll take a quick break now, and when we return, Ramsey Noah Agbo will be here to take us through 2027 politics in view and political alliance amid internal crisis. Please stay with us.